one of the things you might want to do with a CakePHP framework is go from a standard installation of CakePHP across to using something like the Twitter Bootstrap framework, so Bootstrap-ui. And a really quick way of doing that is to use the FriendsOfCake bootstrap-ui plugin, which automates a lot of the things that you're going to have to do. So to give you an example, you'll be going from the base CakePHP for styling and moving across to having bootstrap styling and all those sorts of things. And so we're going to head towards this, what you're seeing here, with the ability to get everything working, but using Bootstrap-ui and that sort of stuff. So to get started, just going to switch to our branch that has nothing in it, and we're starting obviously from a very bare installation of CakePHP. Now, the installation of the Bootstrap-ui plugin is well documented, so all you need to do is start following the bouncing ball, which is initially pull it in, plug it in with Composer, then load the plugin using the Cake plugin load command, and after that there's some automated steps that make it really simple. So as long as you've got everything needed, say npm, which is node, it will just automatically install for you. So it pulls it all in and you don't have to do anything after that. So here is where you can do things in an automated fashion, or you can manually make changes, but we're just going to use the modify view option. And what that's going to do, if we have a look at app view, at the moment all your views, your templates inside CakePHP are extending off this app view class. But if we enter modify view now, you notice that what it does, it changes the app view class to extend UI view from Bootstrap-ui, and that really makes it sort of integrate nicely and very quickly. So once you've done that, what you do need to do is inside your Cake templates directory, if you want to modify the layouts that are provided with Bootstrap-ui, it's a really good idea to use the copy layouts command as well. And what you'll notice as we've run that is that the command has gone into the vendor directory. This is the FriendsOfCake Bootstrap-ui directory, and copied across all the layouts that you can use. Now, another suggestion, and this is kind of important as well, if we have a look at the documentation, we can see that, I'll just do a search for that. So default PHP. Notice it says app view set up using UI view, and that's what we've done. We've configured app view to extend UI view here, but it says here the base class will handle the initializing and loading of the Bootstrap-ui default layout, PHP default layout for your app. Now, that default layout is buried down within the plugins vendor directory files, and it's this file here. Now, the challenge is that if you want to make modifications to this, it's a really bad idea to do it in the vendor directory because it ruins upgrades. So what you can do is go copy the default layout that gets loaded by bootstrap-ui, then move to the project root template layout Twitter Bootstrap directory and just copy that in, because we're going to specify Twitter Bootstrap to load this instead of the one coming from the vendor directory, so we can modify it to our heart's content. So that's almost everything that we need to do. Let's just make sure. Yep, so that looks like we've done all the process to get it installed. Now, just making sure our server's running. When we go here, we see absolutely no change at the moment, but we're now going to start to flesh out some pages so that we can apply the Twitter Bootstrap styling to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bake a controller, and I'm going to call it the forms controller, and I'm going to specify that it has no actions, and that's created a controller in our src controller directory, and I'm going to create a public function that is called the print function, and what that's going to do is hold the code that we to create our forms, as you saw earlier. Now, with every action, you need a template file to render to. So we go into templates, we create a folder with the same name as the first part of the controller name, so it's forms is the name of the folder, and then we create a new file called the same name as the action within the controller. Now, if we just type in that, and then we specify forms and print, notice that we get a hi, and then we get the copyright symbol in the wrong spot. So what more do we need to do to now enable this to make this Bootstrap UI template work? Well, if we look in the documentation, we find that it's got the directions here. So to use the Bootstrap UI layouts, we want to use this command. We want to extend the dashboard. So we can use this command here. So we can. There's three that we've got an option for. We'll just show each one of those. So we go into our view or our template, make it PHP friendly there, and then we just extend it. Now, when we do that and we press reload, we suddenly get all the nice to haves from the from the dashboard layout. Now let's look at the other layouts. So we've got three. If we have a look at these different layouts, we've got three to choose from. It's cover, so that looks like this, so like a centralized view, and then we've got a sign in, and that is just, you put a sign in form right in the middle of the page, and it's just like a blank layout with no nav or anything. So going back to dashboard, we'll leave it at that. We now have pretty much everything. This title, so our title is coming in from, if we have a look in app_local, we've just, like, this is in the app.php, everything is specified in here for your app, but you can actually add things into the app local to make things bootstrap-ui. So you make a change there and you can see that it's being pulled in there. Now what we have here is just some layout issues as well, and if we were to try and fix the layout, we would actually be going to the vendor directory. So we're just going to open up the default layout we copied across and locate our footer. So we've got a footer here and it's saying that it's going to just print out to screen a copyright symbol and the app title, and that's what we're seeing here. But when we look at the inspect command and we go right down to there, it's just being put in there as text and there's no div or anything to center it on the page, and so there's a bit of an issue with that. But that currently is being pulled from the vendor directory, so now we need to specify that the Twitter Bootstrap plugin will now be using this file here. So going into app view, what we'll do is just dump and die this get template. So at the moment, if we reload, sorry, get layout, I get that wrong every time, get layout. So if we reload, that's the template, is the print template. It's currently pulling in this as the template. But as we said, that template is buried in the vendor directory and we don't want to do that. So what we'll do, it will say if get layout equals that, then we want to override it. So if someone specifies something different, don't override it, but if it's the default Bootstrap UI template, do this, go set layout, and we're going to look for this. It's Twitter Bootstrap default. So just copy that and then delete the bits that aren't good. So we're going to go maybe that, and you don't need to specify PHP. And let's see if we've broken it, and we haven't. So now we know that we're saying let's just use the layout and it's relative. So if we wanted to use default, that would be just put the word default in there, but we're using Twitter Bootstrap default, so we just know that we're using that one. So go into here and notice that it's just putting out raw text. So what you can do is, using this find in folder, just do a search for either footer or TB footer, and you can find in here under the cover PHP that it's actually got some code in here that is better. It's actually got a footer element, and so we're going to take that and go into our here, and we don't want it to be white because that'll make it ugly, and we want to copy this into both of these sections, because if there's no app title, we want it just to do the date, copyright the date. So we'll delete that second argument, and then there we go. Alright, so now if we go reload, now suddenly if we look at the, we can see that we've now got the correct markup. So now just use a text center class, because we're using Bootstrap, and so you can use all the methods that, and let's have a look at that now. So now that looks a bit more centralized. Now another thing that the template's doing is pulling in the name of the controller and then just uppercasing it to make it, humanizing it, so to speak. And I want to just change that as well. That's not coming from this layout. It's coming from, if we have a look in here, it's coming from dashboard. So here we have this, notice it's going here, it's basically H1ing the controller name. And so we need to change this. We're going to just remove that. We're going to just comment that out because I don't like it. And we're getting closer to now having a little bit more what I'd like. So notice on the left hand side here with this template, you actually have, and we can look in the default layout again, I'm just looking for sidebar. And of course it's not showing up because it's not in the sidebar, but it is here. So it's in the dashboard layout here, and if we have a look for sidebar, just scrolling down, so we've got this TB Twitter Bootstrap sidebar. So what we can do with that in any one of our views is go and find our template and then say to ourselves, look, I want to add something to the sidebar. Now, to do that, we start with some code and we say this PHP this start, and we're going to start this start Twitter Bootstrap sidebar. And looking at it again, so it's going to, we've got the spelling correct, and now we just say, all right, when we're finished, PHP this end, to end that block of code that we're going to insert there in the sidebar. And then if we go into our Bootstrap and look for nav, and we look for navs and tabs, we can go in and find what we're looking for. So looking for vertical, there we go. So what we're going to try and reproduce is just something like this. So in here we want and then we're going to put a cake style link in here. So this HTML, and we're going to put a link in, and we could call this anything, test action here, and then just specify the action as redirect or whatever we'd like to call it, but probably not a good idea to call it that. Call it yeah, sort of lacking inspiration there. So we've got to close that off. So we're now, if we just refresh our page, we can see that we've created a test action in the side, but that doesn't look exactly right, and there's a good reason for it, because what we've done, if we have a look at our navs and tabs again, we need to set a class here of navlink. So let's do that, and that's our third argument to the HTML link. And so now we're setting the Bootstrap class on our link in CakePHP, and now we can see that it's now, and as we can see, the action doesn't exist, so it fails. Right, so there's inserting things into the template. You just have to look into the template and find out where things are getting put. So anything that's got a fetch statement, and you can then go in and create a block for that, and it will insert where the fetch statement is being put. Notice that your default template has a lot of script blocks or blocks where you can put different things in the default layout here. So now we're going to start to look at just making those forms. So I'm just going to close our open editors and go to our forms controller. Now with forms on the page, we can basically specify, okay, so we want to create a couple of forms. So if we say to ourselves, oh, okay, I'm creating forms to submit maybe print jobs to a bunch of printers or that sort of stuff. So I've got, and we can, well, let's call it line 1 and line 2. So we're talking about production lines, and we could say in our templates here we could specify, well, let's go production line print or something like this to give us our, let's just have a look at it. And of course we need to specify a closing tag there, and well, that looks big, doesn't it? Maybe we can H3. Let's see if that is a bit calmer. It is. And now we can use obviously bootstrap classes to give ourselves some better spacing. Right. And what we want to do is basically flesh out some forms on the page using the code that we're forwarding to the template there. So we're going to go this set and compact. Now we could, yeah, well, let's just do that, forms, and we'll just remove this for the time being. So forms, and then we can go in here and we can say, okay, what I want to do, I want to create, I'm going to go PHP for each forms as form, and inside here I want to end my forms. Now one thing when you don't bake your views is you don't get some of the nice to have. So if I'm opening up here and I'm saying this, and I'm not getting auto completion in my editor, so one thing I like to do is go into one of the Cake default views and go and grab some of the things that are going to help auto completion. So going into, sorry, the print layout here, notice that what's required is you need to enter the block here with 2 stars at the top, otherwise it won't be viewed, won't be seen by the editor. So if I go like that, notice how it changes the color. So just make sure you do that. Now once you've done the type hint for this file, you'll see that you can now go this and then form, and notice it's pulling it in, and then you've got auto completion for everything, which makes it really handy. So right, so we're going to create forms on the page, and we're going to create a couple of controls, and we want the controls to be, one of them is the printer that we're going to send our fictitious job to, and the other is the number of copies that we're going to send. And with each form we want to make a submit button, and obviously the text on that will be print. Now looking at this, and once again we're still working here, and for each print, and we certainly need to close that off. And looking at here, and that might help in getting it right. And go back to here, and this form create null. Good idea. So that's what happens when you copy and paste. Right, so it's a little bit to be desired. So now I'm going to go into my bootstrap method and just get some code for cards. And this is really simple code here, so we can just copy it in. And what we want to do is add. So we're going to say, okay, I want our card to be inside a column. So each card will take up a column. And then we want to replace the body of the card with the code that we've already created. And now let's have a look what it looks like. And right, and so at the moment that's not looking as nice as we'd like it, because it's putting them on. So we're going to go div, put them in a row. So wrap it in a row tag, and that looks a bit better. All right. So notice that's not as good as it could be. So we can go back into our Twitter's Bootstrap, dashboard, I think it is, and go find the no, tell a lie. Go and find the footer. Here we go. So instead of margin top auto, we'll just give it a bit more space and reload. There we go. And so now we've got our print forms looking good. And we might want to put in a title for each form. So inside our body here, let's get some, we've already used H1, I believe, H3, so let's do H4, and we're going to use the inflector, and we're humanizing again, and we're just going to put the form name there so that it looks right. So now we've got our line printing forms looking good. So at the moment, if we do try to use them, nothing's happening. So let's keep going with getting them working. So what do we need to do? Well, these forms, we want to be able to select a printer. So we're going to create a printers variable, and then just go, so printer1, printer2, and these could be database IDs, so you could be selecting these sorts of things, and then printer3. And notice the magic. If we've specified this as printer, but because I'm passing into the view a variable named printers, watch what happens when CakePHP realizes that it has a list of things called printers. So it knows that printer will want these as options. You can specify those sorts of things manually. You can go into your options here and say options equals, you know, whatever argument you want. So you can do that, and just it's exactly the same thing, but you can even explicitly do that. But one thing I've noticed that's a problem here with this form is that I don't want it to auto select a printer, so I'm going to say please select a printer and just provide that as the default. So the empty thing, it's done that, so that's nice. Now what about copies? Now this is where we start to go, well, how do we start to validate and do that with these two forms? They've got exactly the same field names. Let's look at a way of doing that. There's many different ways to approach these things, but what we're going to use is Cake's form classes. So bin cake, bake, form, and we're going to call it the print form. And once we've created the print form, bake the print form, it appears under src form, and there it is, print form. Now with this build schema, we're just going to say, okay, we need to define what type of fields these are. So we can use the add fields command. We're going to type in copies as one of the fields, and we're going to specify the type as being an integer, because it's just a positive number. Then we're going to do the same thing with printer, because they both are, it's either a printer ID or number of copies, they're both integers. Now let's wire that in to our forms. So what we're going to do, we're going to make a change here. We're going to say these are now form names, and then we're going to loop through our form names as name, what we could say as form, and we're going to populate the forms as being this, an indexed array, an associative array with the form name as the key, and we're going to now new up a print form. And so now we're creating this object with a couple of instantiated print form class inside it. We're now going to pass that through, and now we're going to say, okay, just loop through the array key values, so the array keys of this array, and we're no longer going to create a null context form. We're actually going to say, okay, for this form, I want you to populate the context with that instantiated form class. So if, just so that we can see, let's just have a look at forms, what's inside forms at this moment. So having a look, if we just reload, it will dump and die. And notice now we've got line 1 is just got the key of the form name, and then it's the form class being passed through to the view. So now, if we just press printer 2 or printer 1, nothing's still happening. There's no difference. So now if we try again, what's happening? Now we can see the problems starting to appear. So notice when I press print that our values are sort of changing, but not sensibly. There's something funny with both of them because they've got the same names. They're causing problems for each other. So might remove that, so we just use the auto magic of CakePHP. And okay, so we're pulling that in. Right, now let's start to do some more with this. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by seeing what's in our I'm going to grab a reference to the posted data here. So looking at that, we can see when we load it, so if we do so we're getting, that's interesting. Let's just see what that is. Print. Let's move that into a post block. If this request is a post, then dump and die the data. Alright, so that'll give us the ability to get in there and it's really interesting. There's something that we've done that's causing an issue there, and I'd imagine, right, so notice why we're having some weird things happen here. One of the crucial things that you need to do with every form is put an end statement in. So without the end statement, if we have a look, well, we won't be able to see it now because we just fixed it, but what needs to be within the form here is an end tag. So that end statement puts that tag in, and if without it, you'll get weird behavior like we were seeing. So having a look here, if we go back, we go 3, we can see that we're now pulling in the information the way it was meant to be. So how is it functioning at the moment? So if we hit this here, notice that we're seeing that the data that we're submitting for one form is being put into the other form. So we've got a bit of work to do to fix this. So how do we do that? Well, let's have a look at what we're the way we can start to fix that. So I'm going to, in here, I'm going to say if is set. So just making sure that this value is set. So if it's an empty post, there's or if it's not if there's not any post data, don't do what we're about to say. But what I'd like you to do is check to see if the form is what we're posting is equal to the form name that's currently being passed through. Now, in order for this to happen, we need to specify that the post data has a form value. So let's go and do that. So in here, after create, we can just maybe copy one of these and go form. It's going to be a hidden value, so we don't see it. And then we just say, okay, assign a value to that, the same name as the form. Now, looking at that again, if we have a look in our code, we can see in here a hidden form, and the value will be line 1. So once that's posted to the controller, we will get, again, Let's have a look. It's in the wrong spot again, of course. Put it in our post option here. And we will get an array which identifies the form. So we're posting back to the server, hey, you've just received a post from this particular form. So with that, we can do this. We can say, well, if this information set and the form is equal to the current form that we're looping through, can you please use one of the form methods? So go forms, form, and then use a set data method to set the data to that form. Otherwise, what I'd like you to do is zero out the data. So, and can you see what I did wrong there? Yep. So otherwise, zero out the data. So let's see if that's actually now doing what we want it to do. So we select some information here, and we haven't fixed that yet because we've sort of doing the reload. Let's see what it does now. All right. So still a problem. Things aren't working the way we expect them to. It seems that we haven't made any change. We haven't seemed to have fixed things. Now let's go back into our create statement here in the template and make a change here. We're going to say value sources equals, we're going to take values from our context. So what that basically means is we're passing the form in, and we're actually now saying, okay, we're going to take our values for the form from the context class we're passing to the form. And so now notice that when we make a change on one form, the other form, as it should, is blanked out. So it's not receiving the information from the other form. Now when we made a change to our forms, like notice the print form here, we specified that both of those fields had to be integers. Now if I just comment out copies right now, and notice at the moment we've got this here, and it knows that we want to put a number in, but if I refresh this page now without that build schema method having the integer value, notice that now it becomes a plain text input. It just assumes it's going to be a string input. So see the value of getting these schema entries correct. It adds a lot of nice to haves in the form. So now we've gotten to the point where things are working well. But if I was using this and I was going for one production line and I hit print, well, I'd want the other production line to keep the data, and this would be, you may as well just have one form if it kept clearing the data from the other side. So now we're going to look at getting the data persistence using just cookies. So how do we do that? Well, let's have a look at the cookie methods within CakePHP. So first of all, we want to check. So you certainly want to maintain this. We want, if we're changing the values of the we're posting data, so this is saying if this is set and that there's something in it that equals the form name, well, we want to set that data for that current form to that. But for the one that's not there, what we want to do is we want to actually get hold of, see if there's a cookie that's been set. Okay, this request get a cookie, and the key for the cookie is going to be the form name, and then if there's nothing there, just return an empty string. And then use what we want to do, we're going to we're going to pass a string, which is going to be a query string, and we're going to take the form cookie, and then anything that it finds, and it's going to make an array, set it into the result variable. And so from now on, what we want is the result to be assigned to that other form. So we're going to populate the form using cookie data. Now, if we have a look here, we go for there. Currently, it's still not working. So what we need to do is now look at how we're going to set the cookies, and we do that in the post method. So these cookie values are going to be the result of a HTTP build query call. Let's have a look at those. So cookie values, and so we're going to post some information here, and notice it just creates a nice line like a query string, but we're just going to assign that to the cookie. So how do we do that? Well, what we need to do, we need to create a cookie, and we use the CakePHP cookie method, and notice it says what name do you want to give that. So we want that to be the same name as whatever we're passing in from the post data, and we also want it to have the values that we've just passed in there. And now we need to tell the client to store that cookie. So we say this response equals get response, and now we want to modify the response with cookie data, and we pass in the cookie. Now, has that done what we want it to do? Let's have a look. So we say printer 2, and now we go across the other one, and we say 1 copy there. And notice what happens now, that when we change things on 1, the other values are just populated from cookies, stored cookies. So that's helped enormously, but perhaps we also want to make sure that, like, if someone entered -1, that's totally incorrect, but at the moment it's allowed. So let's go and look at validation. So grabbing our print form class, we have a validation method, and we add methods here. So add, well, we might just say we want an integer for printer, has to be a number, and that's okay because we're providing the data. But for the copies, we want to say, well, it's got to be greater than 0, must be greater, no, must be 1 or greater. And then we go less than or equal to, and let's make that 4. cannot be greater than 4. So now what happens with our forms when we attempt to do things? Well, nothing appears to happen because we've still got a little bit more to do to validate these forms. Now there's two methods that we can do. So let's start with a if statement. So we're going to say if this, if form, so we're looking into the forms, we've got the forms there, and we say if this data, we get the form name out of that, so we've got the passed in data form, and we're going to choose a method. Now we've got two options. We can choose validate, which will return true or false if it validates, but we've also got execute. And the difference is that if we choose execute and there's further processing we want to do, we can return, it will then execute this method, and then you can return true or false, and it will fail if it's false. But you can also execute a whole heap of code within here, not just do the validation. So we can use execute, and we're executing against the test, the data. So what do we want to do? Well, if it's successful, it's good, then we want to store our cookies. But if it's bad, well, what do we want to do? Well, we also want to tell the user about it. So we use this flash success, and we might say, we know the data has got, if it's validated okay, so we know copies submitted. There we go. And we might say to, and then we again use our inflector method to humanize the data form name. Otherwise, what do we want to do? We want to say there's something wrong here. So this flash error validation failed. Okay, so there we try it again. Right, so we've now enabled validation for our fields. Now notice what happens when I try to enter something and it doesn't, like I'm entering nothing here in the print field. It's the JavaScript validation at the front end is literally saying, well, you've got to have an integer in there, so therefore you've already failed. So notice that that it requires that you've got something in there. But you can choose to say, look, I want the validation methods showing through here. So you can go into the printer control and say required is false. And then once you've done that, it will then, if we just refresh the page, it will then hit the validation, and you can specify in your print form, obviously, that you want to say, please select a printer. And from that point on, you can see the validation methods if you don't just want to get the JavaScript front-end methods that are doing it. So we can see that is working quite well. Now, there's something a little bit wrong with our flash messages. So let's see if we can find our flash messages. I don't know if it's in this file. It's not in the dashboard file. Okay, so it is. So it's saying if is set this flash, render the flash, but as we can see, it's a little bit too high. So what we can do is just come in and edit our template and say, okay, so I'm going to put a div in here, and I'm just going to say margin top, put in a bit of margin top there, and then wrap it back with some PHP tags, and then start our PHP tags again. So now that hopefully is now showing and the right spacing. So there we have the validation working. We have everything else going okay, and we've just completed getting these forms working and validating properly. So what more can we do with these forms? Well, let's have a look at some of the other Bootstrap methods that are included with the fantastic bootstrap-ui plugin. One thing we all like is icons. So looking in the Bootstrap icon collection, we've got a number of icons, but one of them is the printer icon. So how do we embed an icon within our print button? Well, notice here when we have a look at this submit button, we can do this. We can say this HTML and then pull in the icon method and then put in printer and then just concatenate that to there. But notice what happens when we reload. It gives us the escaped output, and unfortunately submit does not have the ability to well, I'm not sure. Let's try it. Let's see if this works. If it does, let's go escape title equals false. So let's see if this works. If it does, we're sweet. If we don't, it doesn't. So we don't have the option here with the submit to pass in other options. It seems that it's limited. So we're going to now make a change here. We're going to say I want a button, and the type of button is a submit button. And when we have a look at this things, we see that we've got escape title. Now escape and escape title, it's different. This is the title of the button, so we definitely want to change that. So reload, and then we have our print button there. Now that's good. Now if we want to change our Bootstrap classes, we can actually add that. So we want to say button primary, and that will give us a nice blue button. Notice when we reload, it's the icon is flashing. Now the reason for that is we're using the internal Cake server, and so what you can see is that every time we reload, it's re-requesting the Bootstrap icon WAF2 file, but that would not happen with another web server. So if you use Nginx or Apache, Nginx or Apache would say, hey, store this, and the browser would know to do that, and you wouldn't get that flash of the icon reloading each time. Now one thing that we might want to do is with this form is clear the values from the form. Now it's pretty strict. It's being pulled from it's being pulled from the cookies. So how do we make a change? Like, it's not going to work if we create another button and we say well, the new button is going to be the type of, this button is going to be called the clear button, and the type is going to be a reset button, and that's generally what you would use in old school HTML, but nothing happens. It doesn't do anything. So how are we going to give ourselves clear button functionality? Well, let's make a change here, and we're going to use a post link. Now, a post link is exactly what it does. It posts to an action. So let's use that to show you the settings. Here's our, if you have a look under here in the forms documentation, you find creating post links. Now, there is a huge gotcha for creating post links, and if you don't do this, you're going to be scratching your head. But notice it says here, be careful not to put a post link inside an open form. Instead, use the block option to buffer the form into a view block. So given that warning, we're going to add a post link into our form, but we're going to avoid the problem. So the first configuration array is an action. So we're going to create an action in our controller called clear. And then the next array that we can put into is our options for post link. Now let's see what different options we can put in here. We can put a confirm button and say, are you sure? And if we have a look at that, it's probably not going to work right this moment. Well, it does, but yes, so we can put a confirm action in there to give ourselves a pop-up prompt for our post. We can also say to ourselves, what do we need to say to ourselves? We need to, let's have a look at our, here, we need to, all right, so we can add, we need to tell the Cake backend what form to clear. So we need to put an action in here, but we also need to put a form name. So when we do that, when we refresh, we go reload here, notice that when we're looking, we've got to look for this form, that there's the form submit action, which is inside the form. But what we're looking for is a form embedded in the, but it doesn't see there. So that's the problem. If you put a post link inside a form, there is no form available, that it's not going to work. So what you need to do, going to by the documentation, is say put it into a block. Now again, when we reload, if we look for a block, we should be seeing a form somewhere in here, but we're not seeing it. And the reason I've said block is true, and the default block name is post link, just like this. But within our dashboard and default layout, there is no such block like that. So what we need to do is go into our code and find a good spot to put it. So we're going to put it just before the ending body tag. So we're going to just say, okay, let's copy that and put in a script post link block, which is the default block name that it's looking for when you say block is true. Do a reload, and now let's look again. So we can see that we've got the JavaScript click, it's looking in the document for this post form here with the big random number, and then we go down and view the form here. So we can see that it's appended that into the form in the post link block. So now, when we click on it, it's trying to post to an action that does not exist. So now we're going to go in and create an action. So public function, and the action name is clear. It's going to take the name of the form, or it's going to be nothing. So there we have the start of our clear form function. Now, one thing that's really important with data that's submitted, like if someone could put in any name here, could post this, they could put any name in at all and maybe delete some sort of cookie or do something wrong. So what I'm going to do is make a change to make form names into this, a reference to that. And we're going to now move this up to a public function called initialize. And we're going to call the parent, and I'm not entirely sure, but no, it looks like that's correct, the function. And this is where you would load sorts of things for the controller, but you can also do things like this, just create, it's like the constructor as well, but you could do this. And then we're going to, in this post, we're going to say if in array, so check if the name that they're supplying is in the form names array, then we might even make that into protected, is it array? I suppose so. Let's go form names. Let's try that. Alright, so we now have our form names there. We're checking against if the value provided is good. Now what we're going to do is make a change to our response, and we're going to say, again, get the response, and with that response I want you to set an expired cookie. So basically we're going to delete the cookie, and the cookie is going to be the same name as the form that we want to delete the values out of. So it's deleting all the cookie values that we set. And not only do I want you to do that, is once you've posted this data, can you please redirect back to the form that we were on, which is the print actions template. Right, now let's see how that works. Go back to our form name here and see if this works. So hopefully it does. Alright, clear. Alright, so that works. Let's tidy this up a little. Now with these sorts of things, again, we can use those nice bootstrap methods. We can create a column. I think we can also put, oh yeah, so what we're going to do is put in some justify content between. So we're using this display flex to grab these two buttons, and hopefully, if I've done this correctly, there. So we also want to make a change to this. So at the moment is the post link, which is an A tag, but we also want to say, okay, I want to style it again with bootstrap styling and say I want it to be a button and button outline secondary, and see if that looks any better. That's nicer. And again, we want to use our icon class, HTML icon, and we're going to put in an X circle icon. And this time, if we have a look at our post link, the options are so an array of HTML attributes. So I believe with this one, we just have to specify it supports anything that goes to link. So if we're going to say escape equals false here, not escape title, but let's have a look and see if that works. Yeah. So now we have our forms storing their values using cookies and validating against our form methods, not cross-polluting into the form, even though it's got the same name as the other side. And if you were using this, you know, to print labels to printers all day, and the user just had to click this 100 times a day, you know, you'd be confident that the job would stay working and right. It would be the same thing every time unless they made a change. So there's a few things that we can look at with our bootstrap-ui, and using, again, this was modelless forms, but using the cookie classes and those sorts of things to actually interact with cookies and use the response object to send back a response to delete or to add cookies and those sorts of things. Now let's probably that's a good idea just before we finish the video. Let's have a look at these cookies within the in the system. So line 1 and line 2 is what we call the lines, and as you can see, must have done this a few times. So let's clear all the cookies and try again. And that happens if you delete your CSRF token, or it doesn't exist. So let's just try that again. And there we can see. Now, how easy is it to add or remove forms? Well, if we go into our form names here, we can say, all right, line 3 and line 4, and refresh the page. And as we can see, it's a simple matter of adding forms by just specifying new forms. And again, they all validate and they pass the information to the right spot. So I hope this overview of Bootstrap UI and getting Bootstrap 5 running in CakePHP is helpful to someone, and yeah, let me know. Thank you.